This is BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. Donald Trump says he's feeling well with the help of the doctors and nurses at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Earlier, his doctor gave this update.
At this time, the team and I are extremely happy with the progress the president has made. Thursday, he had a mild cough and some nasal congestion and fatigue, all of which are now resolving and improving.
Well, despite that upbeat assessment, mixed messages as Associated Press reports the president's chief of staff said Mr. Trump went through a very concerning period. The White House says Mr. Trump remains in charge, but his presidential campaign is postponing rallies and other events. We'll ask what his illness could mean for America's political future. And Boris Johnson and the President of the European Commission say the UK and EU will work intensively to overcome significant gaps in their positions on a post-Brexit relationship. Hello, welcome to the programme. First, there are contradictory reports about the health of Donald Trump after his first night in hospital for coronavirus treatment. Doctors at the Walter Reed facility told reporters the president is responding well, breathing and walking normally. President Trump himself sent this tweet saying that he was feeling well with the help of the doctors and nurses. But a report from the Associated Press is casting some doubt over that update. The agency reports that Mr. Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, said the president went through a very concerning period and was not yet on a clear path to recovery. Well, let's speak to our senior North America reporter, Anthony Zerka. Anthony, great to see you. What a remarkable few hours in the history of American politics. Let's start with this discrepancy, shall we, between that upbeat assessment from the doctors and that not so upbeat assessment from White House officials. What's going on there?
It makes you wonder. You've got to assume that the press conference this morning was in part to set people's minds at ease that the president is doing well and that the medical team in charge at the Walter Reed Hospital in Bethesda, that they were on top of things, that they had controlled the situation and that the president was going to get better. But then to see it immediately contradicted by Mark Meadows, the White House chief of staff, saying that the next 2 days are going to be very critical in Donald Trump's care. It makes you wonder what the message they wanted to try to get out. I mean, it is kind of in keeping with the way this White House handles press events where they have to clean up after the fact, and sometimes they give mixed messages. But obviously, never has that been so important to speak with a unified voice than during a time of personal crisis for the president like now.
Yeah, and you mentioned there that idea of trying to clean up after the event and trying to sort out the messages. Let's focus on one of those, which is the timeline. The doctor came out and started talking about the timeline of Mr. Trump's treatment, and that was cleared up. Talk us through that.
Yeah, this is so important because the American public and the people who are around the president want to know when the president first received his diagnosis for COVID-19 and what steps were taken. What the physician, Sean Connolly, said in the press conference was that he was first diagnosed 72 hours ago. That would have put Donald Trump's diagnosis on Wednesday. That would be before he traveled to Minnesota for a campaign rally, before he traveled to New Jersey on Thursday for a fundraiser, and well before he announced that he had tested positive for coronavirus. Another physician said that Donald Trump had been taking this antiviral cocktail 48 hours ago, which would have put it on Thursday also, which was before there was any kind of acknowledged diagnosis. Now you talk about cleaning up. There was a press release sent from the White House after this, after questions were raised about this, saying that the doctors misspoke, that the diagnosis was 3 days ago, which means Thursday night, and the antiviral cocktail began 2 days ago, which would have been Friday, and that was in keeping with the official line from the White House. But again, because there is this confusion, it makes people wonder whether the physicians really did misspeak or whether they spoke out of turn. So it just brings greater doubt around all of this when clarity is what the White House needs most.
Yeah, and Anthony, on that issue of clarity, I want to get your thoughts on this because obviously to some people it may appear slightly distasteful poring over these tiny details of what is someone who is receiving medical treatment. But it matters so much, obviously, because of his role.
It does. I mean, the health and well-being of the president, no matter what you think of politics, no matter what you think of him as a person, is essential not only for the American public who wants to know that that there's someone in charge of this country, but also abroad, both for U.S. friends and allies. It's important for the United States to send the message that things are under control here, that the president is still in charge, because there's always the risks that perhaps an adversarial country might try to take advantage of doubt and uncertainty and chaos here on the international stage. So this isn't just about, well, is the president's administration competent, his critics taking advantage of this? This is about presenting a unified and cohesive front to Americans and the world.
OK, thanks, Anthony. Now, for the full story of the day so far, and it's been a remarkable day, I'm going to hand over to Larry Madowo, who's in our Washington studio. Larry.
It's been a truly remarkable day, Lewis, and the mixed messages from the White House are likely to feed into these conspiracy theories. I just returned from Atlanta, where it's a largely Republican-leaning state, but even there are people who started doubting, and we were speaking to them, and they were saying, is he really sick, or can we trust what he's saying, even though a lot of them still feel that they support him and they wish him the best. But it's all going to lead into a lot of people starting to question why the White House is giving these mixed messages. And President Trump has spent his first night in hospital after being transferred from the White House on medical advice following his diagnosis with COVID-19. He walked as he boarded and stepped off the helicopter, which took him to the Walter Reed Military Medical Center, just a short distance from the White House. But since then, he tweeted a couple of times to say he is doing well, and his doctors have confirmed that he is being treated with an experimental drug cocktail injection and the antiviral medication remdesivir. The White House described his admission to the Walter Reed Military Medical Facility as a precautionary measure. Nomia Iqbal has this report.
It's 1 month exactly to Election Day, and President Trump, expected to be on the campaign trail, instead woke up in hospital. Earlier, his physician gave an update from the Walter Reed Medical Center.
It's important to note the president's been fever-free for over 24 hours. We remain cautiously optimistic, but he's doing great. With that, one other note. It should be clear that he's got plenty of work to get done from the Chief of Staff, and he's doing it.
Last night, he left for the hospital unaided, but there was none of his usual bluster and show for the media, and unusually for the president, he was wearing a mask. The White House is trying to project business as usual. Mr. Trump is not transferring powers to the Vice President, Mike Pence, and he's in charge. And he attempted to calm jittery nerves with a message before he left.
I want to thank everybody for the tremendous support. I'm going to Walter Reed Hospital. I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out. The First Lady is doing very well. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will never forget it. Thank you.
He can't have visitors inside, but it didn't stop his supporters from turning up outside the gates. His political rival, Democratic candidate Joe Biden, is on the campaign trail, here in the swing state of Michigan. But he's been careful not to be seen as exploiting the president's illness.
Good afternoon.
Delivering a message of American unity.
Sending my prayers for the health and safety of the First Lady and President of the United States after they tested positive for COVID-19. My wife Jill and I prayed that they'll make a quick and full recovery. This is not a matter of politics. It's a bracing reminder to all of us that we have to take this virus seriously.
It's been more than 24 hours since President Trump announced his and the First Lady's results. And more of those close to Mr. Trump have tested positive for COVID-19. His campaign manager, Bill Stepien, his former senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, and several Republican senators. They were all present at what may turn out to have been a super spreader event, the announcement of the Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett last Saturday in the Rose Garden. The Democrats are now calling for her hearings to be postponed. President Trump's been criticised for his cavalier attitude towards the virus, which has killed more than 200,000 Americans and infected more than 7 million. In recent history, no presidential candidate has come down with an illness this close to an election. Millions of voters have already casted their ballots, where the incumbent has been infected with a potentially deadly disease. For a president who didn't want the virus to be the centre of the 2020 campaign, he now finds himself at the heart of it.
That unveiling of Judge Amy Coney Barrett exactly a week ago today has already been described by some public health experts as a super spreader event. Let's now take you live to the Walter Reed Medical Center, where Mr. Trump is being treated, and speak to our correspondent, Lebo Diseko. You've been seeing some Trump supporters there, Lebo. What are they saying?
Yeah, I think you can probably hear some of their enthusiasm, Larry. There are some real supporters of the president basically telling me that this could have happened to anybody. He is a fighter, and they think that he will definitely overcome. One man told me that he flew in overnight to show his support for Donald Trump. There's a whole range of different age groups there, senior citizens, younger people. What's been quite interesting is there have been a few moments of tension with supporters of Joe Biden. I guess that's kind of indicative of some of the passions we see in the country. But overall, his supporters were really good-natured and telling me that they just want him to overcome, and they believe he'll do it.
My reaction was kind of like shocked, but then again, it's like, seems to me most people are getting this at some point, so I guess I was kind of waiting to find out. I thought he'd have it at some point, you know?
And are you worried?
No. It's the most powerful man in the world, the best doctors in the world.
Well, it was shocking. I mean, I wish I could have had my notifications on my phone turned off, because I saw the news pop up at like 12:30, 1 a.m., and I didn't go to sleep after that. I was up all night, and it was just shocking. And I actually flew in this morning just to be here for a few hours. I had to fly back, but this is the least I can do, is just to show my support. And frankly, I keep telling everyone, it doesn't really matter what side of the political aisle that you fall on. I mean, this is the leader of our country.
I was upset. I was like, I couldn't believe it. So I was kind of like in shock when I heard about it.
What concerns me about him? Well, you know, first it was the age. You know, he's 74, but I think he's going to do fine. I really do.
You want to show support to him.
And want him to get well.
When British Prime Minister Boris Johnson got COVID, there was an outpouring of patriotic support, Lebo. And does it feel like, based on the people you're speaking to there, you're starting to see some early stages of this here?
Well, absolutely, for the people that are gathered here. I mean, you heard one of the Donald Trump supporters saying, look, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. We want our president to be better. That is good for the country. And certainly when you're talking about when Boris Johnson was ill, it is frightening for people when the leader of the country is sick, and Donald Trump is the leader of the free world. I think, though, the issues around, or the questions around transparency, timelines, that Anthony Zerka was talking about earlier, may undermine the White House efforts to portray that positive image that people are really hoping for, looking to them for.
And I'm sure the president will appreciate seeing all those people out there. He feeds off the energy of the crowds at his rallies. And despite all the politicians here in D.C. are talking about, they just want to see him back out there, don't they?
Well, Larry, I was just trying to get up my tweets, but he has been tweeting and thanking the staff at the Walter Reed Military Medical Facility. I guess really trying to, this sounded a lot more like the Donald Trump that we are used to hearing from, upbeat, much more himself, and I'm sure that that's a message that he wants his supporters and everybody else in the country to take away.
Lebo Diseko, Walter Reed Medical Center, thank you so much. We're going to take you now live back to Lewis in our London studio.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you to Lebo too. We'll be back with Larry in Washington a little bit later. Now, as we've been hearing, President Trump has been given two treatments to try and slow the impact of the virus. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, looks at what those treatments are, how effective they might be, and how he could have caught the virus.
Even as the president walked across the White House lawn to the helicopter which would take him to hospital, there was speculation about how the virus might have got through the White House defences. There's a policy of regular testing, but back in July, Donald Trump appeared to contradict his press secretary, who'd said he was tested many times daily.
The press secretary said today that you sometimes take more than one test a day. Well, why is that? And how often?
Well, I didn't know about more than one. I do take probably on average a test every 2 days, 3 days, and I don't know of any time I've taken 2 tests in one day, but I could see that happening.
As well as question marks over the testing regime, it's been noted that social distancing was not much in evidence at this recent event attended by the president, and masks and face coverings appeared to be in short supply. As for Donald Trump's hospital treatment, he's getting 2 experimental drugs. The first, made by the US company Regeneron, involves antibodies produced in laboratories to boost COVID patients' immune systems. Scientists say early results are encouraging, but there are still questions.
It's reduced the amount of virus that those patients then carry. What we don't know yet is whether that strong signal, strong effect on the virus translates into benefits for the patients. And so, for example, does it reduce the time that people need to be in hospital, or reduce the need for a mechanical ventilator, or improve survival?
Experts say the other drug, remdesivir, is an existing antiviral treatment which has shown positive results in one trial.
The length of stay in people who have severe coronavirus infection is less. And so when you have indicators of severe infection, whether that's risk factors or whether it's actually observed lower oxygen rates, the thinking is that the earlier you can get it to patients, the better.
President Trump has had the drugs early on, but these are not cures for coronavirus. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, despite reassurances that the president is doing well, there is still a chance his condition could worsen. But how would his doctors deal with a scenario like that? Well, let's cross to Pittsburgh and speak to Dr. Amesh Adalja, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Thank you so much for coming on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So, we are talking first of all about someone's, personal health, and of course we should say right at the beginning that we wish a speedy recovery to the president. On the actual worst-case scenario of things deteriorating from here, what kind of symptoms will the doctors be looking for over the next couple of days?
The biggest symptom would be shortness of breath. Does the president have difficulty breathing? Does his oxygenation level fall? Does he require supplemental oxygen? That's the key pivot point when we're taking care of COVID patients, where somebody is getting in trouble. We know that somebody's getting in trouble when they start to become short of breath. Other things, you might look at the level of activity, the level of energy, the mental status. You also will look and see how well the fever curve is doing. Is this an unremitting fever, or is the fever being controlled? Is the president getting dehydrated because of the fever? All of that's going to be important to follow in the next couple of days.
Well, that's really interesting. What about the timeline here for most patients? Is there such thing as a typical timeline, starting with sore throat, cough or whatever, and developing? And what are the periods within that timeline to look out for?
The period where it's really critical is about a week or so into symptoms. That's when we see people, especially high-risk individuals like the president, get into trouble, where their immune system is kind of revving up and attacking the virus and causing a lot of damage to the lungs. So people might do well for the first couple of days at home, and then they start to get progressively short of breath, and then they show up at an emergency department and they need to be admitted. So that's kind of why we have to wait for probably this next 48 hours to know exactly what the president's trajectory will be, because you'll go into that critical period where his immune system is going to be reacting against the virus. Obviously, he's gotten some medications which has modulated that immune response, but I still think we have a little bit of time before we know exactly what the prognosis will be.
Well, that's fascinating. So you're basically saying it's frankly too early to say whether anyone is doing well or doing badly. It doesn't matter a great deal until we're into that critical period about a week on.
Yeah, it is. You can't say anything definitively. So far, so good. We know that the president has been hospitalized, so that itself is an indicator of severity. We know that he's gotten remdesivir and a Regeneron antibody cocktail, which also is a marker for severe infections. We don't give those to people with mild infections. But to say exactly what's going to happen, you have to give the virus and the immune system some time to do battle and then see what the result of that may be. So I do think we have to not be premature about saying that everything is clear yet.
Well, your explanation was certainly really clear, and we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Doctor. That's Dr. Amesh Adalja. Now, it's not clear when or if Mr. Trump will be able to go back on the campaign trail. Meanwhile, his opponent, Joe Biden, who's tested negative for the virus, is continuing his rallies in swing states. With roughly a month to go until the election, let's look into how the president's illness is changing the campaigns for both parties. Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Republican strategist Matt Terrell. Thanks very much for coming on the programme.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So this is just a huge moment in American politics, which could determine the future for years to come. And everything is now being thrown up in the air. This, first of all, will change, well, the operation on the ground for the president, isn't it? Those big rallies, that ground operation, that's all got to change now.
Well, that's right. In terms of this pandemic in general, but now the President of the United States has it, his ability to go out and do those big, large campaign rallies that he's been relying on to get his message out, energize his base, and talk to voters, he likely won't be doing for quite some time, if at all, throughout the remainder of this campaign. It's a big game changer in terms of how the Trump campaign and President Trump himself has approached campaigning since day one of his political career. It's going to be up to the campaign now to manage this and figure out the best vehicles going forward for the president and his campaign to get his message out to the American people.
Well, one of the things I'm sure they were planning on talking a lot about is Joe Biden. We're not talking about Joe Biden now.
That's right. If this campaign's a referendum on President Trump's handling on COVID-19, it's not going to be a good outcome for President Trump on Election Day. President Trump really needs to make this campaign a referendum on Joe Biden and his policies and really pumping up Joe Biden's negative polling numbers. And to your point, every day that we're talking about this pandemic, every day we're talking about COVID-19 and the impact it's having on Americans nationwide, is less and less time for the campaign and President Trump to draw that stark contrast between him and Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? I want to ask you a practical question now. You're in a really good position to know this, given your experience. But the fact that President Trump's top team have caught COVID-19, have tested positive with such a short time away from the actual election. Just in terms of practicalities, what kind of impact do you think that will have?
Well, working on political campaigns at any level, but in particular a presidential campaign, is a grueling process. It's physically grueling with a lot of long days and short nights being a campaign staffer or campaign manager. So with President Trump's campaign manager and other staff and other folks within his orbit coming down with this virus themselves, it just physically puts more strain on them, to be frank, in these final weeks and heading into Election Day. So really, it's just not good, just in general, in terms of the ability for these folks to operate in their jobs. And obviously, in addition to that, they're struggling to figure out the next steps between now and November with regard to not doing campaign rallies and how to get their message out and their candidate out there in a way that's effective in terms of reaching voters nationwide.
Yeah. And Matt, just before I let you go, I know it's not particularly your area of expertise, but I just wanted to ask you about the medical briefing that we witnessed a few hours ago. Just in terms of transparency, mixed messaging, what did you make of it?
Sure. Well, transparency is key in this moment and in moments of crisis or involving the president's health. And right now, what the president and his senior leadership team need to be doing is not only demonstrating transparency to the American people in terms of the president's health and progress surrounding COVID-19 and this pandemic, as well as the COVID-19 situation he's dealing with, but also demonstrating transparency and communicating daily with the American people about the president's health and the situation at hand. That's the key here, transparency and over-communicating. That's going to be the steps forward the president needs to take in order to have success with the voters, the American people, and his own staff going forward.
OK, great to have you on, Matt. Thanks for that. That's Matt Terrell. Right, let's take a quick look at some of the other stories making the news now. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have acknowledged significant disagreements must be overcome before the two can agree a post-Brexit trade deal. The two leaders said they'd instructed their chief negotiators to work intensively to try to bridge the gaps. The Prime Minister of Armenia says the country faces a decisive moment as the Azerbaijani offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh continues for a seventh day. Fierce clashes have continued through the day, and the Azeris say they've taken more Armenian-held military positions and forced some troops to surrender. Right, before we go, I want to go back to Larry in our Washington studio, because this is such a remarkable day in US political history. Larry, just give us a sense for people who aren't watching in the US, for our viewers right around the world. How is this being received across America?
So it's a very divisive year because of the election. And so the news of President Trump's illness has also been received through those lenses between people who feel that he endangered himself by being at all these rallies, or others who feel that this could have happened to anyone. He's a man in his 70s, and so it's not unusual that he got sick, and they wish him well. Are you even hearing that from people who are on the other side, the Democrats, who also still wish him well? He's the president of the United States. You saw former President Barack Obama, Joe Biden, all saying we wish the president well, and we're hoping that he pulls through and he and the First Lady are getting the care they need.
Indeed. All right. Thoughts to echo, I'm sure, around the world. Larry, thank you very much for being with us. Do remember that you can get me on Twitter @LFawnJones. I'm Lewis Fawn Jones, from Larry and from me. Bye-bye.